So yeah, so I think Putin was pretty clear about the goals of has been pretty clear about the goals of the invasion ever since the spring of 2022, and lately he has still kind of commented that there is basically five goals that Putin and the Russian government are trying to reach in the war. One is trying to reach the non-alignment of Ukraine with the NATO and change of Ukraine's government. There is also demands to severely limit the Ukrainian defense capacity and then to take over some Ukrainian territory and gain this seizure to get also international recognition for this seizure, and at last lifting of the Western sanctions on Russia. Obviously, Putin also had a maximalist agenda in the first weeks of the war. There was hopes to manage to organize a quick takeover of Ukraine, to install some sort of puppet government, and also to annex entirety of the territory of Ukraine. But this failure didn't signify that the loss of that it doesn't mean that he didn't manage to reach his goals, but this doesn't mean that these five lesser goals cannot be fulfilled. And this is probably was the calculation in the beginning. This kind of whole takeover and quick victory was kind of probably not something that Putin was sure about, but it was still kind of calculation that some of these lesser goals can be achieved. And all of these five smaller goals, which I listed, they are possible in case Ukraine loses the war. But still, this discussion of so it's completely like reasonable to continue in terms of reaching the goals. This kind of just from point of view of losing the war or winning, it's rational to continue the war. But in Western discussion, also pretty much in Finland and also among the Russian opposition circles, there is still discussion if Putin is completely crazy. What is this? Maybe he has some secret intentions besides the one that he is stating openly. And also, yeah, if he's completely insane. And also lots of discussion also in Finland. I continue all the time. People are making a statement that Putin has actually already lost the war. But if we remember that Putin's intentions and goals are different from point of view of normal liberal and democratic values, these Putin's words and actions after starting the war, they are kind of consistent. So yes, we definitely have to also assess if Putin is crazy. Personally, I didn't believe to the start of the war until almost the last day. I was supposing that this will not be happening. Like many others, I expected Putin to understand that it's very difficult to occupy the whole of Ukraine and to conquer and make it part of Russia. And mistake I did made personally, and mistake that many other people made making the prognosis on the how likely is the war, is that we didn't understand that there are also some more modest goals in the game. And this was not a uncommon mistake. Even in the Kiev, the political class didn't even really expect the war until basically the cruise missiles were in the air. And in this way, this war of 2022, it's not like so much different from the 2014. Also in the 2014, there was a chance of Ukraine being completely crushed and to get a completely victory for the Putin. But these more limited goals, like taking over some territory in Donbass and Crimea, they were also acceptable. And also, what about this discussion about possible secret calls and secret intentions? I think at this point it's safe to assume that these five modest goals, they are more or less what Putin really wants, because his more ambitious goals, they are not more in the reach. But so, what is basically this victory? Like, in which terms we can discuss what would be actually victory for Putin? Actually, victory in the war, it's a bit, and in the battles, it's a bit difficult concept. We also see often that there are cases when it's contested who actually won some war or battle. In Wikipedia also there are these edit wars about, for example, I was checking some battles of the Sino-Japanese war in the 30s and 40s, and all the time, like, people who are editing these articles, they are changing it to Japanese victory, to Chinese victory, and so on. Also, there can differentiate the concepts of the tactical victory and strategic victory. It's possible to win a battle, but to lose the war because there were mistakes made during the battle. So, yeah, in case some war has just one objective, it's quite easy to define who won, who the victory in the war is in the side who managed to achieve or move towards these goals. But if there are several goals, like Putin has several goals in Ukraine, then it's more difficult to assess what would actually be the war in these kind of cases. So the three first goals, which I listed, that the Ukraine's non-alignment with NATO, a change of Ukraine's government, and limitation of Ukraine's defense capability, these goals doesn't seem very likely, but at least it seems to be quite possible for Putin to seize some Ukrainian territory. It doesn't seem right now that Ukraine has like military capability to take over all the territories that Russia has occupied since the 2014. It seems quite possible that Ukraine will gain NATO membership. And while Putin managed to occupy some additional territories, and yeah, this is the situation when Putin is failing some of his goals, but managing to reach other goals. And in any case, the human cost and economic cost of the war for Russia is just enormous. So yeah, it's a question if this can be considered a Russian victory. I mean, eventually, of course, what is Russian victory demands of the opinion of the Russian people, or more exactly, what kind of result Putin may and his propaganda machine, they may convince the Russian population that it is a victory. And I think, yeah, it's possible that even some quite small territorial gains, like some parts of the Kherson area and land bridge to Crimea, or even just holding the territory that was won in 2014, might be considered widely as victory in Russia, because the whole Putinist propaganda is attempting to transform values of Russians to these neo-feudalist values. So yeah, so what are these neo-feudalist values of Putin? This is, of course, a word that is misused quite a lot. I see this discussion of neo-feudalism in many different contexts. There is discussion, for example, if internet has become feudalist or neo-feudalist. And yeah, it's typical that many kind of alternative forms of capitalism, they are labeled as neo-feudalism, because feudalism is basically the most historically closest economical system to capitalism. It doesn't criticize the private property. So whatever transformation of capitalism, that is not like a socialist transformation. There is kind of, how to say, it's quite lucrative to call this kind of transformations as transformations to neo-feudalism. But obviously, Putin is not nationalizing any means of production in Russia, except to some scale foreign investors' property, but not he's not going to touch the property of the loyal oligarchs. So there is definitely no any socialist transformations happening in Russia. The collapse of the Soviet Union was very, very tragic event for Putin and traumatic. He's not going to try to repeat the Soviet experience of some sort of common property. Also, it doesn't try to stop accumulation of capital and move to some sort of subsistence farming, exploiting the serfs. So obviously there is no any transformation to real feudalism in Russia. And the goal of Russia is not to destroy capitalism, but to develop a different kind of capitalism. So it's a bit misleading to call these developments as neo-feudalist, but there is no better term, so we will use this one, or I will use this one. This, so how does this neo-feudal capitalism is different from kind of ordinary capitalism? Is that in the neo-feudalist capitalism, the hegemonic class is not the bourgeoisie and the bourgeois liberal values. Instead of this, it's the special caste of security and military forces that are called siloviki, and the supporters of this class in the bureaucracy and the business, who are keeping the bourgeoisie under control. So in this sense, it's definitely a bit similar to medieval knights and priests, who also were trying to keep bourgeois class and other lesser class under control. So this is why where this kind of label neo-feudalism to the Putin's system comes. We can also call this modern class of bureaucrats nomenclatura, as it was in the Soviet Union, and it's definitely direct heirs of this Soviet ruling class. Putin and most of the people aligned to him, they were privileged caste also in the Soviet Union, but usually not like the highest decision makers. It's typical, for example, that many of these current loyal oligarchs, they were, for example, in the Komsomol organization in the 80s and so on, so in the middle level of the Soviet nomenclatura. Then there is third term that is used, is political capitalist. This is a term that Vladimir Yushchenko is using. It's also a term that comes directly from the Marx, I think, when he was discussing the Napoleon III regime in France. But obviously this political class is political capitalists, it's a different class from the bourgeoisie, and the values are differing. They are not like ordinary capitalists. And I'm in the beginning of this talk and in the remaining of the talks, I'm discussing the values and mental movements of Putin, but obviously Putin cannot do things alone in Russia. I could also discuss about this values and mental movements of the nomenclatura, or the political capitalists, or siloviki, or whatever you want to call the ruling class in Russia. Because it's basically Putin is a product of his own class. His values and mindsets is basically the same values and mindsets and goals of his class. Even if he's dictator, he needs a support from his own class, and if Putin is overthrown, it's quite possible that his follower comes from the same class and has the same values as Putin is having. So how can be concept of victory, how it can be understood in this neo-feudal framework of the values? So in this conservative and neo-feudal value world of Putin's, these kind of bourgeois values as capital and money and human life, they have a secondary importance, but the land is having a primary importance. obviously, like Putin was by far not always so enthusiastic about the human value and the human lives when bourgeois class was fighting for the hegemony against the aristocrats in 18th and 19th century. Often there were like massive loss of human life, lots of humans were sacrificed. Also often when bourgeois class has been defending its privileges, there has also been massive loss of human life and not much respect for the human rights. But anyway, these concepts of human rights, and it's still results of the bourgeois revolution. So this is something we, even if basically I'm not maybe big fan of the bourgeois idea and values, it's still basically, yeah, the human rights is originally bourgeois concept. But it's definitely not the neo-feudal Putinist concepts. These human rights, they are poison for neofeodalism. And these neo-feudal values, they have a definite logic. His idea is that basically whatever losses in the capital and population, they can be replenished with few decades, but the land might be thousands of years. It's offering revenue and security buffer. And this is also basically idea of the medieval knights. Medieval knights, they were not afraid to go to the war. They were not afraid of basically losing some capital assets, but they were trying to grab as much land as possible and defending it. And also different kinds of governments and international agreements. From point of view of Putin, they are just some flashes of history compared to territories. And it's possible that this ideas is possible to sell to the Russian people when the war is over, when the guns are silent, because it's one cannot underestimate the will of people to be in the side of the winners. So usually people kind of try to justify all the sacrifices and suffering, and to think that all of this had some meaning. And for Putin, definitely the war has some meaning. Yeah, I will maybe write another piece, made another podcast about Russian economic system and this neo-feudal economic system. I wrote a piece called Napoleon III in Kremlin 13 years ago. It's available in Finnish and in Russian. Might be that I will also translate this to English. Which is basically some background to this discussion. The system, of course, is not Russians' eternal fate. And this is not like, it's quite common discussion in Finland about this like eternal Russian authoritarian thinking, different kind of whatever Slavic values which make democracy and human rights impossible, whatever. But this is of course crap. Like this neo-feudalism, there has been long periods of authoritarian rule in Russia, also some periods of relatively democratic rule, for example, in many areas in the Middle Ages. So definitely, yeah, there is a long authoritarian tradition in Russia, new forms of authoritarianism, and they are kind of inheriting some parts, logic of the previous ones. But the current, like Putinist, this neo-feudal conservative values, they are completely different from the Tsarist values. They are completely different from the Soviet Union values. It's a completely new system. It's formed only during the last 20 years. It doesn't necessarily live that much longer. And even through these theories, they are based on the Slavophiles of the 19th century and also Ivan Ilyich 20th century philosophy. So the Putin's ideas in terms of ideology, they are not that super new. But it's only now, in the 20s of the 21st century, this idea has got the chance to spread and to make a breakthrough in the context of the Russian neo-feudal economic system. And yeah, there were obviously like some aspects of imperialism in the Soviet system also. There were authoritarian rule in the Soviet system, but the ruling class and values and economic system in the Soviet Union, or all of the different periods, because Soviet Union obviously also have different values and economic systems in the different periods of the history, but none of these were similar to the Putin's set of values and Putin's economic system. So, after all this discussion, I can try to define victory in war. So it's basically, victory is a situation in which the weight of achieved goals is greater than unachieved goals from within the framework of a given value system. So, in this definition, the victory is value-dependent concepts, and it's even possible that both sides of a war have win the war if they have a different value systems. And with this clear definition of victory, it's also possible to understand and evaluate if Putin is crazy or not. Because being reasonable, it's also not any absolute concept, but it depends on the values of a given person. So war is making sense, war is reasonable if a victory can be achieved according to some value system. And Putin obviously cannot win in the framework of some liberal bourgeois values, which respect human rights and capital, because losses in terms of human rights and capital are huge. But this victory is possible within the framework of his own values. And this kind of victory is not necessarily like exclusive with Ukrainian set of values or Ukrainian victory. It's possible that Ukrainians can basically conclude that they managed to secure the independence, they managed to secure national unity, and also gain some integration to Western market, which were providing economic system. And if they manage to get the free trade agreements or membership of the free trade of the trade unions with the West. But so from the point of view of liberal bourgeoisie, this can be considered also an Ukrainian victory, but this far there is no any understanding for territorial consensus in Russia, and these are reasons that are easy to understand. There are lots of anti-Russian sentiments and ideas in all the areas occupied by Putin. For example, the Crimean Tatar ethnic minority that is mostly historically been aligned with Ukrainian interest. And in many areas, there is obviously in all the parts of Ukraine, there are at least some people who have like pro-Russia, pro-Putin point of views, but for example, in the occupied Kherson area, this is a very small or minimal part of the population. And in these occupied areas altogether, there are millions of pro-Ukrainian citizens that are forced to stay there under the Putin's authoritarian rule, or even leave their homes forever. So in this sense, right now, Ukrainian victory, it cannot include any territorial concessions. And it's also true that these Russian territorial demands, they are not based on any proper historical borders that Putin is trying to return. Instead, it is just like basically any territory of Ukraine can be theoretically, from point of view of Russian ideology, official ideology, and from the point of view of Putin, can be considered as Russian territory. So any kind of takeover of some territory, it might mean like future invasions and wars, because Putin basically doesn't consider Ukrainians as real people, but just that they are Russians who have some sort of false consciences, and any kind of territorial concession, they will encourage Russia to attack in the future. So, what are the consequences if Putin is victorious? We can basically get some idea by From the recent history of Russia and Putin, the Second Chechen War ended in Russia's victory without any negotiation, and it was a big popularity boost. Then in 2008 there was a Georgian War that was provoked by the separatist South Ossetian leadership. It was basically a trap for the back then president of Georgia, Saakashvili. Then 2014 conquest of Crimea is one of the most popular achievements of Putin, but in contrast, the intervention to Syria's civil war to save Assad dictatorship was hardly noticeable in the Russian society, and there was not much boost for his popularity. But anyway, Putin already had 4 victories in his resume. This is something that probably obviously no current world leader can brag about this many victorious wars. And it's basically, it's set his basically formula of success, how Putin has managed to stay in power in 25 years. It's pretty much a result of this victorious war, and which have at least 3 of them has boosted his popularity. So these 4 wars, they were much less complicated than the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but it's also possible that upcoming wars, they can be more simple. For example, Putin can annex Transnistria from Moldova, also Belarus. He may wrest away the Kazakhstan's northern region or southern Ossetia, and also join some wars in Middle East and Africa, which basically used to be handled by the Wagner Group, now more directly by Russia. And probably he can do all of the above in case there is victory in Ukraine. So this basically Putin's victory in Ukraine would mean many other wars all around the world. And basically these repeated wars, they are also pretty much the only way for him to preserve Russia's neo-feudal system. Without any kind of external enemy, it's not really possible to justify this existence of this nomenclature ruling class, this bloated security system and all this bureaucracy. It is basically parasiting both on the working class and Russian bourgeoisie. And in this respect, this necessity of war, it's an aspect that makes the Russian system similar to fascism, because also for any fascist system, it's pretty much obligatory to invade other countries. But there are also lots of other differences between the Russian Putin system and the fascism, for example, in terms of the historical origins, how the ruling class was formed, and also what is the role of the subjects. I will return this comparison of Putin's system and fascism in some upcoming texts. But so, I'm approaching the end of the stream. What are the conclusions? The conclusions is that like peace negotiation, how possible it's to achieve peace, how possible is to do compromise with Putin. It's depending on whether the attack was mistake from the Putin's perspective, because if Putin considers the war as a mistake, it's possible to achieve peace without the risk of the further war. But in case Putin made rational and calculated decisions to have a war and considers the war as correct decisions and a success, then obviously there is a danger of new war, and any kind of concession, any kind of compromise would risk some future invasions. And if we understand this neo-feudalist set of values, it's not reason to suppose that he's regretting anything or that his reasoning is not rational. Pretty obvious that Putin is not crazy, and in his set of values, war is nothing wrong, because war is a necessity for his power and his economic system and for his class. So any kind of territorial concession or recognition of the annexed territories from the last 10 years would only lead to a new war. Okay, that was pretty much it from today. Thanks for everyone who were following. The video will be published, in case you joined late, the video will be published next Thursday on my channel, and the text will be published in Freedom's website and in Autonom, and also the audio version will be published in the podcast services. I will continue with some writing other texts about the current Russian economic system and set of values, comparison of fascism and so on, and also transformation of the Russian society, and also transformation of the anarchist movement. So please stay on, follow also the next episode of this discussion, because of course kind of understanding what kind of transformation are happening in the Russian society and are pretty important in trying to understand how to change it and what can be basically done in this current situation of wars and escalation and tension. But yeah, okay, so thanks for this and see you next time, hopefully